All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a massive historical puzzle. How did the world's absolute greatest economic success story become its greatest disaster? We're going to peel back the layers and look at the hidden economic machinery operating just beneath the surface of the First World War. Picture this. You wake up in 1913. You are living in the absolute richest, most advanced civilization on Earth up to that point. Your job is secure, global trade is booming like never before, factories are pumping out record amounts of steel, ships are carrying goods all over the planet, and new technology is changing daily life at breakneck speed. For millions of people, there's just this limitless optimism. Everyone genuinely believes the future is only going to get better.
And that boundless optimism is exactly what makes our core mystery today so incredibly jarring. Because less than 5 years after that peak, those very same ultra-prosperous nations had completely destroyed everything they'd spent decades building. Millions were dead, 4 massive empires had collapsed entirely, and global economies were just left in absolute ruins.
So we've got to ask, right? How does an era of just unimaginable wealth turn into total economic ruin so fast? What actually happened to that booming civilization?
Part 1. The illusion of infinite prosperity.
You see, all that European wealth, it was kind of an illusion. It didn't just magically appear from within Europe. It relied on this tightly connected, highly fragile web of resources pulled from thousands of kilometers away. We're talking rubber from Southeast Asia, cotton from India, copper from Central Africa, and increasingly oil from the Middle East. Economic strength meant you had to control these vital supply chains. The world was more connected than it had ever been, but that connection meant any disruption was profoundly dangerous.
Let's make this real by looking at one ordinary person. Let's imagine a German steelworker in 1913. He's got a peaceful, secure livelihood building railway bridges. But his job, his factory, and his whole nation's booming prosperity rely entirely on that fragile global supply chain. Every shipment of foreign resources feeds his factory, and his factory strengthens the national economy.
Now, the history books usually tell us the conflict started with a single bullet in Sarajevo, but wars of this staggering scale don't just happen because of one assassination. We really need to challenge that narrative. What if we look at the immense economic forces already churning beneath the surface? If we remove that one trigger, would this massive economic engine have pushed Europe into war anyway?
Part 2. The hidden engine of war. Because long before 1914, these nations were already locked into a massive tit-for-tat industrial arms race. As Germany's industry surged, its neighbors understandably got nervous. Britain countered by massively building up its naval fleets. Russia rapidly modernized its railways so it could move troops faster. Every single nation claimed they were just acting defensively, but together they turned Europe into the most heavily armed region on the planet. Here's the really dangerous truth hiding behind all that prosperity. Industrialization has a dual-use nature. The exact same blast furnaces pouring steel for skyscrapers and railway bridges today, they could instantly pivot to manufacturing deadly artillery and battleship armor tomorrow. The capacity for unimaginable violence was literally baked right into the economic boom.
Okay, so our steelworkers factory is suddenly cranking out heavy weapons instead of bridges. Millions of soldiers need to be mobilized, equipped, and fed, which naturally leads to a massive cliffhanger. How do governments actually afford all this? I mean, the costs are just astronomical.
Part 3. Paying for the unimaginable. You know, a modern war doesn't actually start on the battlefield, it starts in a ledger. Every single rifle, every artillery shell, every battleship has a price tag. And taxes alone couldn't even come close to covering the staggering costs of a global war. So governments turned to the financial system. They issued war bonds. They actively convinced ordinary families to empty their life savings to lend money to the state, promising it would all be paid back in a glorious, victorious future. Money literally stopped flowing to create prosperity and started flowing to sustain war.
And all that borrowed cash, it funded a logistical machine that is quite frankly terrifying to think about. We aren't just talking about a few regiments marching around, we're talking about hundreds of trains moving soldiers every single day. At battles like Verdun, millions of artillery shells were fired in a matter of weeks, so many that they permanently reshaped the geography of the land. Shipyards ran around the clock. The entire economy was fundamentally rewired to function for one purpose: sustaining destruction.
But as the weeks dragged into months and then years, the money had to keep flowing. The battlefield might decide who wins the tactical fights, but in a modern war, it's the financial system that determines how long nations can actually keep fighting. And the true breaking point of this economic endurance was about to hit the civilian population hard.
Part 4. When society becomes the battlefield.
With the resources shrinking and millions of skilled men shipped off to the front lines, production tanked right when the demand for weapons peaked. So governments had no choice but to take absolute control. They seized civilian factories. To solve the massive labor crisis, women entered heavy industry in unprecedented numbers, building aircraft and filling artillery shells. And because global shipping routes were totally disrupted, strict civilian rationing was implemented for everyday essentials. We're talking bread, sugar, fuel, everything was controlled.
This absolute mobilization, it's what we call total war. It's a state where entire economies, industries, and societies are just fully swallowed up for national survival. It demanded deep, painful sacrifice from absolutely everyone. A factory worker forging steel was now just as crucial as a soldier sitting in a trench.
Let's check back in with our steel worker in 1916. His peaceful life is totally gone. He's been drafted and sent to the muddy trenches. Back home, his wife actually steps into his factory to operate the heavy machinery just to keep the war effort going. Meanwhile, inflation is eating away at the value of their wages, and they are forced to stretch every single coin just to afford strictly rationed bread. Their entire existence has been completely consumed by the war machine.
So, when the guns finally stopped on November 11, 1918, the world obviously celebrated the end of the bloodshed. But peace didn't erase the cost of the war, did it? It simply revealed it. Governments were left staring at an impossibly ruined ledger.
Part 5. The Crushing Price of Peace. All across Europe, countries were desperately trying to rebuild, while juggling massive debts, caring for wounded veterans, and fighting over intense political debates about reparations, especially the incredibly heavy reparations slapped on Germany. This immense financial pressure culminated in severe economic instability. In Germany, this exploded into the disastrous hyperinflation crisis of 1923. It was an economic collapse so severe that the money they printed became literally worthless.
Just think about our ordinary steelworker one last time. He somehow survives the trenches and makes it home. But he returns to an unrecognizable reality. The empire he knew has collapsed, his industry is broken, factories are sitting silent, and because of hyperinflation, all those patriotic war bonds his family bought to support the war, totally worthless. His entire lifetime of savings just wiped out.
And that history leaves us with a pretty haunting reflection for our world today. The exact same economic engines, the global supply chains, and the industrial technologies that create extraordinary, record-breaking prosperity, they also hold the terrifying capacity for unimaginable destruction. It really makes you wonder, when industry, finance, and politics all start moving in the exact same direction today, are we truly aware of the machine we're building?